So apologies for some background noise. I'm in an airport, and therefore, what I'd like to do on this meeting is keep it relatively short and focused. I'd like us to wrap up within 20 minutes to half an hour, if that's okay, which should be doable because we're not in a situation where we need to do a lot of editing. We are in a situation where we have an important decision to make about next steps. Chris Wood, our chair, is on the line. I see we also have Jacob and Tanaka-san. Naturally, we are recording this as well, and it will be made generally available. Before we start, the antitrust policy notice is shown as always. The full antitrust policy is on the LF website, and you can ask questions of our counsel, Andy Updegrove, if you're from an LF member company. As usual, this meeting follows a regular agenda. So we're going to be doing some work on our standards. We have a look at work on reference material or supporting material. We have a space for any other business, and then we close the meeting. Some news to start. We've had a relatively eventful couple of weeks in the OpenChain project in terms of the importance of the news that has appeared. But before that, a quick overview of the international calls this week. So we've got a webinar which just happened yesterday. That was on open source due diligence. That webinar was with Yari. The recording will be available very, very shortly. This is the monthly call. As usual, we're going through the North America, Asia stuff today. And on Wednesday, we're going to have the automation work group meeting. It's pretty important over there, actually, in automation, because they're looking at end-to-end automation solutions. In open source now, there are projects in the Linux Foundation like ORT, which allow companies to potentially set up SCA, beginning to end with reference implementation that they could customize and do various things with as well. Naturally, that supports our mission in OpenChain. It also supports activities around meeting the NTI minimum requirements for SBOM. Okay, the news items, some very big announcements. We had OpenEuler announce adoption of 18974. So that's the ISO standard for security assurance. The OpenEuler adoption of this is pretty significant. About a year and a half ago, Eclipse formally adopted ISO 5230, covering all of their projects, including the operating system ecosystem OpenHarmony. OpenEuler is under the OpenAtom Foundation, and it's a pretty big project. So it's over 500 projects inside their umbrella, and 36.4% of the enterprise operating system market in China. They released a case study of their adoption, and that was very cool. We were confirmed to have 2 talks at the forthcoming Open Source Summit Europe in September. We'll be looking at open source and IP departments, risk containment, and portfolio management. That's on the operations and management track. But we're also going to have creating standards from writing a spec to obtaining ISO status, which will go through all of our learned lessons. And that'll be on the standards track there. We've had some interesting webinars in the last couple of weeks. One of the important ones is, I think, the OFE briefing on the EU Product Liability Act. So we've had a series of 3 webinars, one on the Cyber Resiliency Act, one on the AI Act, and now one on the Product Liability Directive. These are 3 parts of European guidance, regulation, or forthcoming laws that will impact open source and open source related companies in various ways. So this was the 3rd of the 3 webinars scheduled. If you go to the link, you can have a look at the webinar. You can also easily get to the other webinars. We had a meeting of the Governing Board Strategy Subcommittee. This was a meeting that was board members, but also open to the public. And it was digging into the education work group, what it's been doing in the last year or so, what's forthcoming, et cetera, et cetera. The strategy subcommittee does deep dives into things. It's currently doing deep dives across the active work groups, and then it provides a summary to the board of what's going on, how we can support their activities, et cetera, et cetera. That's important because we have a board meeting coming up on the 26th of June where the board will hear from the strategy subcommittee and be able to find out what's going on. We had our usual telco work group meetings as well. Interesting stuff over in telco. They finished the telco SBOM quality guide. That went out via the education work group. It's currently in markdown format, and the PDF printable versions are coming in very soon. English, French, simplified Chinese, and Japanese available. Markdown on GitHub, and like I said, printables coming soon. But let's jump into the business of the day. And by the way, I see Mary joined. Hi, Mary. Great to have you here. So the work on standards and core material. This is something I wanted to flag to highlight that we've actually closed an awful lot of the open issues. So Chris spearheaded this, and in the last few months, we've been going through the open issues and getting to the stage where we've closed them off ahead of hitting a public comments period for the draft future standards. And the idea here is that we were closing off the open issues, and then we hit this public comments period, which runs for 6 months and isn't designed to do substantive changes to the standards. It's designed to solicit feedback, fix typos, minor changes. And then we go into a three-month freeze period, at which point the standards would then be put before the steering committee for a vote on whether the draft documents will be switched into updates to ISO 5230 and ISO 18974. So on the last call, we sort of closed off two of the main remaining open issues. One was on security assurance, so that's ISO 18974. One was on license compliance, that's ISO 5230. Again, these are draft future versions of the standards, edited by the community, go through a public comment and freeze period, and then go to the steering committee for approval or further changes as necessary. What we did was we were looking at essentially expanded definitions, getting consensus. What did the majority on the calls think? And then on license compliance review cycle, and adjustments suggested from 18 months to 12 months. Both of those issues were closed off, running with majority opinions. And that means that what's scheduled for this call is whether we move to a public comment period for both specifications. In other words, we stop closing issues now, we move to a public comment period. This would start 9 months before our target completion date, runs for 6 months, and only accepts minor updates, typos, grammar, not requirement changes. And after that, there'd be a 3-month freeze period, and after that, go to steering committee for final review and a vote on whether to update the ISO standards and when to do so. So we're going to have a quick check on the open issues to confirm if we're in a position to do that. And I have the open issues on another window. We'll start with the security assurance spec, just pulling that up. You'll see that we don't really have much to add. There are 3 open issues at the moment. So one is about having additional documentation on review processes. And that particular issue is basically saying, have a review process, and we actually do. 3-4-2 duration, check that the program is conformant, and review it every 12 months. So I'm suggesting that we close that issue off now. It's already addressed in the spec. And I wanted to ask your opinions. What do you think about closing that issue because it's already addressed on the spec?
I'll second that. This is Chris.
Oh, hey, Chris. I'm trying to figure out who opened it. It looks like it might have been you, Shane. Did you open the improvement issue?
It came on a previous call.
Oh, okay, because I was wondering if that person was on this call. Could we ask them if they were satisfied with the answer?
The provenance of the request. So SMK 10 comes from the JTC1 subcommittee 27 information technology security. And they had a look at ISO 18974 before it went through the pass process. And they gave us a bunch of comments of, first of all, they said, yes, it's fine. It doesn't conflict with anything we're doing. And that was the key thing. We wanted to go into ISO, make sure it didn't contradict them. Second of all, they sent in various suggestions for improvement or so. And this was one of them. And adding a documented review process was a suggestion, but not a hard requirement. It was just of many ideas that were appended. But it does appear they might have missed the duration thing where we actually ask for a review period. We just don't say what the review period is, but that's our normal practice. We don't normally tell people how to do a process content.
Right. Yeah, I agree. But I'll co-second it with Chris. I just wanted to ask that question. Thank you.
Okay, concurred by many great people. Closing. All right. And actually, with that closed, and great question, Mary. I'm glad you brought up the provenance on that. There's a thing saying, how about we do maturity models? And then how about we change the scope? And those seem like questions to address in the next revision, as opposed to now. We are not in a position to look at maturity models because there's comments of there's various ways to do maturity models. There's an IEC standard for it. It's a discussion we haven't really had in OpenChain, and it probably also belongs with the board or the steering committee to talk about whether we'd want something like that or not, because many parties in OpenChain have previously taken the stance that maturity modeling is an implementation question. It's not a question for our spec to determine how mature you are. If you meet the process points, you meet the process point. If we were to introduce maturity modeling, it's a new thing. And I'd suggest that that conversation is a conversation to have for another time, because a bunch of stakeholders need to be talked to. The second item. Oh, thanks, Mary. Yeah, because levels 1 to 5 and so on. That sounds like a lot to add potentially to an ISO standard. And honestly, I think from our conversations in the past, we'll end up discussing this for a while and deciding, sure, if people want to find out about maturity models, we can have some reference material explaining what a maturity model could look like, but we probably shouldn't include it in the standard. And that's where I'm guessing we'll end up, but it's probably going to take several months of several committees talking before we get there.
Yeah, I think from my years with messing with CMMI and all its various iterations and changes, that is almost something which would come out of an industry request or the recipients of what comes out of people being in compliance with the licensing and the security spec, rather than us dictating it and saying we've got a maturity model. Because you're right, we are way too early in the process, I think, to come up with one that is meaningful yet.
All right,
Mary?
I'm closing it off.
I was just going to see if Mary agreed with that.
Yes, that makes sense. And like Shane said, we'll probably all come to that same conclusion after a little discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, it's something we've already got scheduled to bring back to the steering committee. So on the 26th, I'm planning to bring up the fact that maturity modeling is being discussed. But what's incoming from the industry is potential donation of reference material. That's what's incoming to us, as opposed to someone saying they want it in the standard. All righty. Just spinning that up then. And the last one is just scope suggestions, and just opening that up. Okay, this is again a thing from JTC1, Subcommittee 27, Information Security Technology. And this came from Russia, and it was marked editorial suggestions, but it seemed to be a much larger thing about scoping. And the conversation sort of went in circles. We held a special call to discuss this in September 2022. And we just moved all of these outstanding items to this version of the spec, but we've had no chance to discuss this in any detail. And quite frankly, we didn't really understand the request. So we probably need to go back to that security subcommittee in ISO and ask them to help define what that request was, because our understanding was limited. And I'm just going to pull it up very quickly for the sake of completeness. Here we go. I have so many open windows. Okay. So this is, I'm just going to double check which one it is. RP. Yeah, so this is scopes, editorial suggestions. Yeah.
Yeah, we've touched on that first one there with our discussions about discovering and scanning and not scanning, and
Right.
just recommending that a good thing to do would be to incorporate SAST and DAST, which is looking for the known and the unknown vulnerabilities within the software. So from that perspective,
we've done it.
Probably need to confirm that would address their itch. The second one is a little bit more confusing.
Okay. I'm just going to say that the second one really confused us all. Identify the roles and responsibilities that impact the performance and effectiveness of the program. We have that equivalent, but this need to add a requirement to define the bounds of operation for each role. Honestly, our only read was that bounds of operation is the roles and responsibilities. We didn't understand why someone would want to add bounds of operation to roles and responsibilities, because we felt we covered that. Adding bounds of operation just seems to be saying responsibilities in a different way.
Right.
My suggestion is, on the latter one, we say that we think roles and responsibilities is an adequate requirement. Defining the bounds appears to overlap with responsibilities, and therefore we don't see a need to action this.
Yeah, I agree. I wonder if there was a language, maybe there's a translation, for here, because I agree with you, Shane. I wonder what they were getting at.
Yeah, I wonder if the bounds, by bounds, maybe they interpreted that to be the limits. In other words, you explain what the roles are, and then you say, but here's the limits. You can't go beyond this. I don't know, because it's hard to translate from Russian.
And I think that, do we want to be so prescriptive? It's like, if you want to have your, open source attorney be involved in OSPO stuff, like why not? Or, why should we be limiting anything?
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Sure.
All right. All right. So basically then our answer is, we did cover this in expanded definitions in the draft, because we added security testing to the definitions, and we covered exactly that. And then this item bounds appears to be, as you said, probably a translation thing. So I suggest we just close that off, and I'll also go back to them and check if we need to do something there with talking to them. I imagine we
That's
don't.
great.
Is they never follow it up in general when we sent back some comments. Okay, I'll address this. I'll fill out that text a little later. That actually means all the security things are closed, and the only thing left is license compliance. And the license compliance suggestion is to add a version history, which we have never done. What we do instead is we make available all the versions on the website if someone wants to go back, as opposed to trying to describe the adaptions as if it was a software update. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, this don't we use GitHub? This is perfect.
Yeah. You can go all the way back on everything we've ever touched if you want.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and they wanted to add common use cases of license exceptions, export restrictions. I don't think we should touch that.
It could be
No.
maybe the reference material, but not the spec itself, right?
Yeah, right. This seems like overhead that we just don't need on the standard. We could have it in, as Mary said, reference material. Okay, I'm just going to add this point 1 address. I'm making old specs available, posting on GitHub, which is amazing. Point 2 belongs in reference material. That closes all of the stuff on our standards. And in that case, the only item left on this call is to discuss the fact of, given we've closed all the open issues, do we move to a public comment period where we're not going to be closing issues, which we don't need to now, but we're going to be advertising everywhere, like social media and stuff. Have a look at this, see what you think. That's also the opportunity for me to go back to ISO and say, public comment period, here we are, here's all the issues you gave us, here's how we close them, and let them come back if they have comments. Chris, what do you think?
Is the 6-month review period, does that have some basis in the ISO requirements for the length
No.
of time?
It's our methodology in the project where we used to have I believe it was a 6-month period for public comments and then a 2-week period for freeze period. A couple of meetings ago, the board said, we affect so many companies, we should put more time into it. So they want a 6-month public comment period and a 2-month or a 3-month freeze period to ensure we can keep going to committees and around the world, because we're so open. We want to make sure we can genuinely say we've advertised this everywhere.
Well, my personal opinion is that I think that we ought to move to that, and since we've closed out all of the open items, there is no sense in waiting.
Any other perspectives? All right. No objections. So to recap, what happens is we go to public comments, 6 months for people to come back with comments. We don't aim to change the drafts, but we want to collect feedback, raise awareness. After 6 months, if nothing critical has happened, we switch to the freeze period. At that point, it's locked, but we're going to people and saying, truly, this is it. And then we go to the steering committee and say, here is what the community proposed as updates. Do you approve of that? And what release schedule do you want to use? The steering committee is the governing board plus the chair of SPEC. So at the moment, that's Chris and the governing board members. So last chance, anyone concerned about that? Or do we move into our period? All right. With no objections, and definitely I'm in favor of it, and delighted Chris is in favor of it. We're going to do that, and I'll begin to announce the public comment period, and I'll start socializing it everywhere. Okay. I'm super tight on time because my security queue is nearly empty. So I'm going to say that on the reference material, we haven't had big announcements beyond what we talked about before. In May, they confirmed that the supplier education leaflet, training, SBOM quality guide are basically done. Thanks to some great additions by Mary, we finished enhancing supplier education. It's ready for release. Training is ready for release. Supplier education is ready for expanded release. All of that will be happening in the next 2 weeks. Space now. Any other business? All right. With no other business, and a very excited airport announcement staff, I propose we move to close of meeting. Anyone object to that, or all in favor?
I second it.
Have a safe flight.
I hope so. I'm going to Seoul. Our career work group is about to kick off an awesome meeting, 50 companies. We're
Wow.
going to have fun. Yeah, that's
Great.
insane. And this is the community meeting. It's not a conference or anything. It's just our get together.
Wow.
I'll be announcing our comment period. I'll be announcing the new material that's coming out from education. I'll be telling them we've closed every open issue. So it's very exciting that this call happened. It's great to have you here. And Chris, welcome back. It's so good to have you back.
It's so good to be back.
Take care all. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right.
care.
Have a good trip.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.